It's nice to see such a great turnout here. My name is Carolyn. I'm a librarian with the Madison Public Library. Thank you for coming tonight to our Ghost Story program with the Madison History Association. Before I turn the mic over to Jimmy, I'd just like to let you all know on September 30th, we're having a special program with the Singing River Trail, and the new executive director, Misty Potter, will be here to give us an update on what's happening. So please come back in 2 weeks, Tuesday night, September 30th at 6 p.m. And thank you to the Madison History Association for putting together this great program with us. So anyhow, here's Jimmy. He's going to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome.
I'm Jimmy Parkus. I'm from Madison, Alabama. Believe that? Grew up, was raised here. Don't live here no more, though. Okay, but tonight we got a spooky speaker tonight. But before I get to him in a while, him and I were together in the 279th Signal Battalion in Huntsville, National Guard. And when we'd go out on our summer camps, 2-week summer camps, I ran a switchboard, just like you see the old operators. The light would come on, you plug it in and you talk. We had old equipment back then. And Robert was right there next to us. But what's ironic about it, our switchboard was called Nightmare Switchboard. And you gotta tell him about that, he'll remember it. But I'm not gonna talk anymore, I'm gonna let her get up here. She's gonna tell us some wonderful stories tonight. And boy, I wish we could get it a little bit darker, that'd be nice. All right, this is Miss Jacque Reeves.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight. We do own the Huntsville Ghost Walk, in case any of you have taken. I know some of you have taken that tour, but first I want to ask you, how many of you believe in ghosts?
Quite a bit.
Okay, how many of you don't? It's always, okay, it's usually the men, right? But you're here anyway, right? So somebody made you come, all right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in ghosts. We all loved ghost stories when we were kids, didn't we? There's something about being afraid that makes you feel most alive. So we did a lot of historic research because for me personally, if I go to a ghost walk, I want to know who's there and why they're there. It doesn't do any good for me to hear that, oh, you smell cigarette smoke and things move around. I want to know who's doing it. So we did a lot of historic research, of course, and then we came across a medium who's not from here, who does not know our history, and he was able to communicate with the ghosts, and he was able to verify a lot of our research. And if we didn't know what he was talking about, we went back and did some more research. So he told us some things in addition to what we found in the history books. So the first story I want to tell you tonight is about a shopkeeper here in Madison. And his name was Nathan Freeman. And the store that he had is now, I think it's a restaurant on Main Street, an Italian restaurant. Yes. Okay, so that is where this event took place. In 1884, a man named Charles Townsend, who lived in Brownsboro, was on his way to Birmingham. He was looking for a job, looking for more work. But he stopped in Madison, and a friend of his talked him into staying here. And so he was able to find work. He was working with several other men, including a man named Wallace Neal. And Wallace was, he was pushy, and he recognized that Charles was someone easy to manipulate. And so after a few days of working together, he says, you know, that shopkeeper, Nathan Freeman, he's got like $800 locked in a desk. Can you imagine how we could live on $800? And all we have to do is kill him. Charles said, I don't want anything to do with this. But Wallace kept working on him and working on him. And he finally got him to relent. It was in early December, and they hatched a plan. The plan was that after everybody had left the shop, that Charles was going to go in with an axe, and he was going to kill him. And Wallace was going to stand outside the door and be a lookout. So in those days, the shopkeepers stayed open late. And on that night, it was December the 9th, 1884, people kept coming in, going out, coming in, going out, and finally there was nobody left. Charles went in and said, I want a dime's worth of peanuts. And at that time, Nathan bent over to get a scoop full of peanuts, and Charles lifted up his axe and he brought it down on his head. And then he lifted it up again and brought it down a second time. He ran to the front door to lock it, but first he whistled for Wallace to come help him. Wallace wasn't anywhere around. What do I do? Charles didn't want to do this in the first place, but he locked the door and he went back and did what Wallace had told him to do. He took out a knife and he cut the throat of Nathan Freeman. And then he rifled through his pockets and he got the keys and he went to the desk and he pulled out the money, the cash that was in there, and he took out the cash out of Nathan Freeman's pocket. And he dropped the knife into a crack in the floor, as he was told to do. And he went out the back and he dropped the axe into a well. And it was very dark and very cold, and he started looking for some kind of shelter, some trees, and that's when Wallace came up to him. Where were you? I thought you were going to help me. You were going to be the lookout. Well, he says, I saw that everything looked okay. You were doing fine, so you didn't need my help, so I left. So they started a fire and they started looking at all the money that he had got. It was less than $25. He had killed him for less than $25. Charles was very upset. And he says, I'm going to turn myself in. No, you can't do that. If you do that, we're both going to be executed for this. Wallace says, look, I'll just take $5 and you can keep the rest. So Charles had a very fitful night. The next morning, I'm going to turn myself in. Wallace said, just go on home to Brownsboro. Just go. Don't tell anybody. Well, it was a little closer to noon, I guess it was. Nobody could get into the store to see Mr. Freeman. Where has he been? This is not like him. So somebody broke in through the front door and they found his body. They called for the doctor, Dr. Richard Fletcher. And he came and of course he pronounced him dead and looked at all the wounds on him. And they started looking for someone who could have perpetrated this horrible crime. And there was Wallace Neal and several other people. Did you know that Nathan Freeman is dead? Wallace looked very guilty. Well, where's your friend Charles? And Wallace looked at the ground for a long time. And then he said, he's an indicator. Well, I don't know what transpired next, but they finally decided that it was Charles Townsend. And they started looking for him. They found him in Brownsboro wearing new clothing, and they took he and Wallace Neal both into Huntsville to try them for murder. They were both found guilty. Wallace, though, he said it was Charles. It was all him. I didn't have anything to do with it. Charles said, well, it was all Wallace. I didn't have anything to do with it. But Wallace was given life in prison, and Charles was executed. Now, the hanging tree at that time was on the outskirts of town, which is where the Von Braun Center is now. So when we went in with a medium, this is what he said. He said, I see the ghost of Nathan Freeman. He's in here, and he tells us that he knows that there were two people involved in the crime. He knows that only one of them did the actual killing. And he said that as soon as he got hit the first time, he said, what the heck? And he heard a voice say, it'll all be over in just a minute. Now this is what the ghost is telling us. And he says, I laid there, I stepped out of my body as soon as I went to the floor. I stepped out and I was looking down at my own body. And when the doctor came and he put his fingers into the cut in my throat to determine how deep it was, and I thought, can't you just use a ruler? Get your fingers out of my throat. And he also said this, they took my wedding ring and one other thing they took. but he won't tell us what it is that they took. So to this day, we don't know. But our medium says, underneath this floor that's here now, if you look, there is still some blood from that knife that was dropped in through the crack. They scrubbed the floor. They tried to get up all the blood they could. They couldn't get everything. And in between the two boards where it was dropped, his blood is still there. Nathan Freeman is aware of the passage of time. He's there at the building. He sees people who walk up and down the street. And ghosts are aware of the passage of time, except it's condensed to them. It's not how we experience it. And they may be here with us. They want to know what we're talking about. They may be attached to somebody. They have a message, maybe have a message for you. Well, I'll tell you my personal story before I go on to the next story. I was walking through Maple Hill Cemetery one day, and I was doing some research, and I had a sign in my car that said Huntsville Ghost Walk. And this man walked up to me and he said, I walk through the cemetery every day and I see ghosts. Okay, well, tell me some stories. Well, this one was the most interesting. He said, every day I walk past the grave of a man who was standing next to his headstone. And every day I walk past him and I say, good morning. And he bows his head. And I said, well, what does he want? He wants to be acknowledged. Well, what does he say? He doesn't say anything. Well, what is his name? Well, I can't remember, but I'll take you to his grave. It was the grave of my great-great-grandfather. I don't see ghosts myself. I don't want to. My next story, I'm going to leave this here because it feels awkward, is about, now you have a street here, Will Halsey Road, Will Halsey Street. This is about his grandfather. Now his great-grandfather, Will Halsey, also, because that's the name that keeps going down, that confuses all of us who are trying to get these stories straight, was a portrait artist. And he was very well known, and he was very good. And I have two portraits at home that I believe he painted of two of my ancestors. Anyway, he had a son, two sons, who started the Halsey business. It was Charles and Will Halsey. And at some point, Charles was not in the business anymore. There is a store in downtown Huntsville, W.L. Halsey Company, and they sell items for restaurants, I guess it is. And the store that is the second place where this business was, but the story is taking place there on, it's not Lincoln Street, is it Jefferson Street? Okay. On May the 9th, 1909, Will Halsey was in there, business as usual, and he had two other employees in there. His son, also named Will Halsey, and a young man by the name of Gus McDowell. Across town, 54-year-old J. Robert Jones, who had grown up with 54-year-old Will Halsey, got up from his desk, and to no one in particular, he said, I'm not looking forward to this, but I might as well get it over with. He walked over to the store, and the two men went to the back, and they had a conversation in the office, and at 20 minutes till 5, a customer started to come in. He stopped at the door, and what he saw made him freeze. At that moment, the two men walking side by side towards the front door, Will Halsey reached into his pocket, pulled out a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol, pointed it at his friend, J. Robert Jones, and pulled the trigger. Once in his chest, and as he was falling to the floor, once in his shoulder. Now this story, we started researching it because one night when we were given a ghost tour, we were walking past that business, and there was a couple on the tour that said, I don't know, when I walked past here, this young man said, I felt this strange sensation. First, I had a terrible pain in the top of my shoulder. And secondly, I felt like I was trying to go through I can only describe it as a wall of spider webs. I'm trying to fight my way through the spider webs. And you'll understand this when I get to the end. So when we did our research and we walked inside, but this is the story first. J. Robert Jones is laying on the floor. We think he's dead. Gus McDowell goes to the phone to call for help. In those days, we didn't have 911. You called the apothecary shop, the drugstore. Send a doctor, send an ambulance. I fear Mr. Jones is dead. And so he went back to the scene, and there was Mr. Halsey with his hand down, pistol. And Gus McDowell said, "Hand me your pistol." Will Halsey lifted up his hand with the pistol and he pointed at Gus and pulled the trigger. Now, Gus could see that this was about to happen, so he jumped sideways trying to avoid the bullet, which of course he couldn't. The bullet went into his hip and it came out through his gut, leaving a gaping hole where his intestines spilled out. He ran out the front door into the alleyway that separated that building from the Smith carriage factory that was there at the time, and he collapsed, but he wasn't dead. The police came and they found Will Halsey sitting at his desk, the pistol on top of it, and he said, "I'm the one you're looking for." They took him into custody. They kept him overnight on suicide watch, and the next day he went before Judge Thomas Lawler, who was murdered a few years after that. But he was taken for a lunacy hearing, and his wife was there, Mr. Halsey's wife, and she testified, "Well, he just hasn't been himself lately." Several other people testified he was deemed to be insane, and they sent him down to Bryce Hospital. The next time I find him is 30 years later, his obituary in the newspaper. Will Halsey has passed away in New Orleans. He was a prominent businessman in Huntsville until his retirement. And he was buried at Maple Hill Cemetery. From me to you, that close to J. Robert Jones, the man that he had killed that day. Well, let's go back to Gus McDowell. Gus was rushed into surgery. 2 doctors worked on him. They took out 18 inches of intestine with 9 perforations from that one bullet. And they sewed him back up and they said, "He's not going to make it." He lasted for a few days and then he passed away. And a newspaper reporter had asked his father-in-law, "Why do you think Mr. Halsey did this to your son-in-law?" And he said, "I don't know. He thought of him as his own son until, well, lately." He was also buried at Maple Hill Cemetery. So what happened? We went inside and our media made contact with the ghost of Will Halsey. And he's walking around the interior of the building, and occasionally he stops and he looks around to make sure nobody's watching, and he puts his hand on the wall to steady himself, and with the other hand he holds his gut and he leans over and he's in obvious pain. He tells our medium, "My thoughts are not my own. I see ghosts. I need to spend more time at the business, but I can't concentrate. I need to spend more time away. Everything is just foggy." But he shows that this is what happened. On the side of the building is a loading dock. And one day there was a wagon that backed up with goods to go inside the store. They lowered the tailgate and locked it into place. And Will was going to help unload the wagon. He jumped from the loading dock onto the tailgate, but as he did, his foot slipped. And he came down on the corner of that tailgate right here in his gut. It was hard too. He had some internal injuries, but what are they going to do for someone in that era with internal injuries? Nothing. But give them something for the pain. Laudanum, maybe? Cocaine, maybe? The more you take, the less effective it is. The more you need, the more you take, the less effective, the more you need. It's a vicious circle, and he became addicted. And pretty soon, his mind was just a blur. But now, in death, he has gone through that veil of confusion like spider webs, maybe. And he's looking back with clarity. And he says, "I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that." Sure is quiet in here. We are told that if we die in a way that is unexpected, violent, like let's say a plane crash, that we leave our body before the impact. and that someone who has died in a similar way will come from the other side to help us understand what has happened to us and escort us to the other side. And we're told that when we die, we're not necessarily stuck there or here, that we can come and go. And that after we die, we can come back and help those of us who are left behind. And for example, my father died when I was 11, and it was unexpected and it was sudden. And for a few years after that, I would have dreams where he was with us, with the family, and maybe he was standing off away from the rest of us. We knew he was there. He didn't ever interact with us. And maybe even get in the car. He'd get in the back seat. We knew he was there. He didn't interact. And I had those dreams for several years, and then after several years, I quit having those dreams, and I was told, your father was here to tell you that he was watching over you, but then when he realized you didn't need him anymore, then he didn't come to your dreams. Now, I'm not sure how we're supposed to know that they're here to help us, or how they're going to help us, but it's an interesting story. So my next ghost story is about the Masonic Lodge in Huntsville, Helian Lodge number 1. Have any of you ever been there?
On the ghost walk.
At the ghost walk. You want to tell the story?
I don't know.
Okay.
It was several years ago, but I know that it was like a treat because we went inside, and typically they don't like let you do that, but somebody happened to be working at that time, so they let us in, so. It's a neat
Oh, I'm glad you got to go. We're also going in again this year, since COVID is over, I hope. Anyway, the Masonic organization, by its very nature, is suspicious because of the movies that have come out, because we're not supposed to know what all of it is about, and so people make up things, and who can deny it or who can confirm it, because they're not supposed to. But the Masonic organization was started, the stonemasons, back in the Middle Ages, and it was a fraternal organization, and they would take care of each other, and they had the secret signs and passwords so that they knew that they were in the same organization. And nowadays they do it just because it's, what is the word I'm trying to think of? It's tradition. It's not necessary, but it's tradition. So the Masonic organization was very popular 150 years ago, because it was a great place for men to get away from their nagging wives and their whiny kids. And okay, so does anybody know the tradition about Friday the 13th? Okay, this is a cool story. The Knights Templars were a French organization. They were also men who gave up their riches and their wealth. They were usually from prominent families for the organization. And their job, they wore the white robes with the red cross, and they would escort pilgrims who wanted to go to the Holy Land, because the Muslims would wait for them and rob them or kill them. So they were there for their safety. So the Knights Templars, as an organization, were very wealthy, as you can imagine. They had land, they had banks, they had everything you could think of, and the King of France, this is in the 1300s, was jealous. And he had borrowed money from them, and he didn't want to have to pay it back. The Pope at that time was also French. So the two collaborated, the King and the Pope, and they've done some yangling back and forth with the Knights Templars, and the King says, come on to Paris, and let's let bygones be bygones, and we'll just kiss and make up, okay? So they all came to Paris, and on Friday the 13th in October 1306, the king issued an arrest warrant for all of the Knights Templars. And the Pope was in on this too. So they were tortured, trying to find out where they had the gold, the riches, everything that was physical that they could get their hands on, and the men wouldn't give it up. And so the Pope made all kinds of accusations against them. Finally, they were burned at the stake. They were executed. And their leader was a man named Jacque. They saved him for last. He was burned at the stake. By the way, in those days, if you had a little extra money, you would pay the executioner to use dry wood. Why is that? Yep. And if you were gonna be beheaded using an axe, you would pay the executioner to sharpen the axe. Why is that? Try to get it in one whack, right? To be blunt. So Jacques de Molay is tied to the stake. He says, face me towards Notre Dame Cathedral. And he pronounced a curse on the king and on the pope. Within 1 year, both of you will be dead. And within 1 year, both of them were dead. So we have this Friday the 13th superstition. But let's go back to the Masonic Lodge. Helian Lodge number 1 is the oldest lodge in the state of Alabama. And if you look at, they have a plaque on the front now that shows what it looked like. The original building was built in about 1823. And as it became more popular and they had more members and they added on to it. So I don't know why they didn't duplicate the original building and the new building that was attached by a single wall, because it I'm sure looks strange, but one of the walls in the original building collapsed. So they tore it down, but remember, they've got one wall that was common to both buildings. So if you go inside, you will see that there is a staircase that goes up to the second floor, and it goes just to the wall. It's where it ends. And it connected the two buildings. You understand what I'm saying? But there's no door there. And so the Masons have seen the ghosts of former members walk up those stairs and disappear as if they were going into the original building. Now, when we went there with our medium, he said, it's surrounded by death. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that some of the Masons that have passed away wanted to be cremated and have their ashes strewn around on the grass. But the other thing is there's a rock wall in front of the building. And in that rock wall are headstones. And apparently when it was being constructed, somebody had the bright idea to pick up some loose headstones, because they are very nicely carved, and put them in the wall. And in fact, on the top of the wall at one place, you can even read the name of somebody who had passed away. So surrounded by death. Now the Masons themselves, they don't necessarily like to talk about it, but I did find, one that was a little chatty. And he said that on the top floor where they meet, they have this nice plush carpet. And sometimes when they're in there having their meetings, they see footprints in the carpet when there's nobody there. There is a clock on one of the walls, and several people have seen that clock fly off of the wall and fall to the floor. It doesn't tip off, it flew off and fell. Now, others have seen the room full of all of the Masons having their meetings, and the ghosts are aware of the people that are in there. So all of the ghosts turned and looked at these people, and 2 of them came running out. This is when we were giving a tour one night. Well, I was standing in front of the lodge one night, and I was on the steps, on top of the steps, and 2 people saw this happen. They saw a ghost walk through the door, and he was wearing a hat. A lot of the lodge members in those days wore hats. And he was leaning against one of the columns, and he was listening to me. And one of the people, he recognized that she could see him, and he doffed his hat, and he turned around and walked back through the wall. Another member told me that he was driving by the lodge one night, and he saw the lights were on the 3rd floor when they weren't supposed to be. So he went inside. He was going to turn off the lights, but when he turned his key in the door, the lights went off, and there was nobody there. Now, I was just told this last week. They have hidden cameras all inside because they had some problems with vandalism, and they were looking at one of the cameras just recently, and they saw a really heavy door in the basement slowly open. And it was open for a little while, not very long, about 8 minutes, and then it slowly closed by itself. And he said, we tried everything we could to reproduce that event, and we could not. So while we know that it has ghosts in it, we know that they are benevolent, because the Masonic organization itself is a benevolent organization. Well, do we have any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
What's the theory about J.R. Jones saying that I'm not looking forward to doing this?
He was an insurance salesman. So we don't know exactly, I assume, that he probably came to collect some money that was overdue. I don't know that for sure, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier, we are told these
Yes.
things. Who is telling these things?
Well, I've read a lot. We've had a number of mediums take our tours. And I am putting together a book right now for a psychic medium. Now, he's done the writing himself, and I'm just organizing it. But I've been learning a lot. So people have different powers. A lot of it is inherited. And by the way, we're all born with this ability. But when we get to be about this age right here, we don't believe anymore because people have told us, no, ghosts aren't real. So some of you probably had maybe a playmate who was a ghost when you were little, or maybe you remember a former life. So when I say we are told, I'm not an expert, so I want you to know that I can't say this, factually. Does that make sense? That's probably more than you wanted to know.
No, I want to hear what
Okay,
you have to say.
okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Were you surprised by the ending of Sixth Sense?
Yes. Who wasn't? Oh, wow. I watched that by myself in the middle of the day, and it just creeped me out. But what a great movie. I cannot watch it again, though. Who wasn't surprised? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just curious about the archive aspect of it, like when you're kind of fact checking against these stories that you hear. Do you continue, because I know I've done all the ghost watches, because I think the history
thank
is really
you.
interesting. I love that you guys bring the history into it. So do you continually, I know you said you've had several mediums do the tours, do you continue to go back into those archives?
Yes.
For new information as it comes across?
Yes, because especially on, like I have a subscription to newspapers.com and ancestry.com, and I'm real careful about what I read on Ancestry because sometimes the dates don't add up and people don't check. But newspapers.com, you can almost be pretty sure that that's going to be accurate. And more comes on those sites every day. So yes, I do continually go back. In fact, there's one story about a World War I soldier. You probably know this, John Zike, and all he gave us was his name, John Zike. And when he's talking to the medium about other things about his life, he's talking in profile. But when he's talking about his life, he's full face. See, he was shot through the eye in World War I. And he tells us, I was shot through the eye by a German sniper. I bandaged it myself and I went back to my rifle and I finished what I was supposed to do. So we found a little bit at a time, but now we know the whole story. He was a member of the 29th Infantry Regiment. And he showed us a picture of the yin-yang symbol, but it wasn't black and white, it was blue and gray. So we found the regimental patch. And he says that he went to Camp McClellan. I said, you mean Fort McClellan? No, Camp McClellan. What we found out is that he was born in Russia-occupied Poland. He was living in New Jersey when World War I broke out. I found his draft card, how tall he was, his eye color, hair color, how much he weighed. And when he joined, he was put into the 29th Infantry Regiment, which was called the Blue-Gray Regiment, made up of young men on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. And they went to train at Camp McClellan. So I read all about what was going on there while he was training and how the people in that area loved the soldiers and they took care of them and they had parties for them and they had dinners for them. And then they all left and they went to New York to board ships to go to fight in France. Well, I said, were you in the Argonne Forest? He says, now I don't see ghosts, but I'm talking through the medium. He says, you called it Argonne, we called it hell. And I found the exact description of the fight that he told us about. It was in August of 1918, and it was at 4:40 in the morning, when a signal flare was dropped into their camp. It was completely lit up, and the Germans had them surrounded, and they had a horrible fight for the next hour. And I found where he had received, and I know I'm gonna get this wrong, the Silver Meritorious Service Cross, what is it? I know I'm gonna get it wrong. Nobody? Okay, well, he got an award for bravery. And the description of this event said, John Jacque, a private, went to his gun, he was shot through the eye. He bandaged it himself, he went back to his rifle, and he kept firing until the mission was over. I assumed, well, we all assumed that he died as a result of that wound. He did not. He lived to be in his 90s. He went back to New Jersey and died in the 1980s, early 80s. So as time has gone on, I've found out more and more. Well, why are you here? I asked. You're from New Jersey? Why are you here? Well, he says, he was a jokester. He says, I'm not very good at reading maps, and I was on my way back to Camp McClellan, and I got lost. Well, the house where he is was really creepy looking, and it had a lot of shrubbery in the front yard, and you couldn't even see the front door. I mean, it was a perfect haunted house. And so he stayed there. He was there with several other ghosts. We call it the fraternity house for ghosts, because they were different men from different eras who did not know each other in life. So he stayed there because the house looked creepy. Well, okay, but why Camp McClellan? So I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody on the tour. How many of you were in the military? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. I hope that you answer it the way I want you to. How many of you, while you were in the military, could not wait to get out? You're counting down the days. Am I right? Okay, in retrospect, when you look back at your time in the military, how many of you look at it as some of the happiest time of your life? Yes? And I think it's that way with John Jacque. That was the time when he was whole as a person, and he had the camaraderie with the other soldiers, and they depended on each other as you all do with your life. And that's what he wanted to go back to. So I also found letters he had written to his sister while he was in the military, and they were published in the New Jersey newspaper, or the town where he was from. And he was a jovial guy, happy, just, never negative. And his spirit is the same way even now. And he says in one of his letters, he says, yeah, we're in the trenches here, and we've got these huge rats that run through us, and they're as big as American house cats, but they're our pets. We love them. So he's a real person. Anybody else? Nobody? Anything? Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Let's see what time it is. Yep.